Hi, this is Megan with Believe in the Ren.
And this is Megan with Featherstone Nutrition.
And you're listening to Fuel for the Soul, the podcast where we chat all things hydration and nutrition and how it affects performance. And today is episode 2 of a 3-part series. This is helping with disordered eating thoughts as a runner. So if you haven't yet, go back and listen to our first episode where you'll be introduced to Lindsay, who is on the show today, and get her full background and a bigger overview on disordered eating. Before you listen to this one.
Yeah, thank you for being back, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Excited to be here. And I think for me, ultimately, I've been in the field for about 10 years, and I'm just excited to help shed some light on some ways in which I can be helpful at various questions that have come up for you guys on disordered eating or eating disorders.
Wonderful. Eating Recovery Center, ERC, is a leading mental health care system dedicated to the treatment of eating disorders and co-occurring conditions. ERC provides expert, multidisciplinary care teams that utilize innovative and evidence-based treatment programs to offer healing and hope for a lasting recovery in individuals and their families who are suffering with an eating disorder. ERC's treatment programs are located across the nation in several states, offering in-person and virtual treatment options. They offer a full continuum of care model to meet individuals where they are at on their journey to recovery. ERC treats patients of all ages, body shapes, sizes, races, ethnicities, religions, sexual identities, gender identities, and expressions. For more information, please visit eatingrecoverycenter.com and check out the show notes for more information.
All right, so let's get into our first question here. This comes from Jess S. She said, "Hello, fellow carb lovers. I have been struggling as an endurance athlete and a mom to figure out a good balance of fueling my efforts and teaching my kids how to get what they need. I struggle to get the carbs I need for ultra running and training with just whole foods like sweet potatoes or bananas. But if I buy simple carbs like crackers, juices, or candies, my kids just blow through them. I don't want to teach that they can only have those if they are training hard, but the reality is they are not training and probably don't need all the simple carbs they are filling up on. Any tips on teaching balance without accidentally instilling a diet culture or, quote, earn your food mindset? I grew up with a plethora of food issues that turned into years of eating disorders, and I still fight, so any thoughts on raising kids with a healthy food mindset would be absolutely invaluable. Keep up the fun banter and knowledgeable bombs."
Yeah, so I really appreciate this question. I think I see it in a newfound light these days after having a baby last April. And I think it's really important to me to help others set that foundation for their kiddos at home. So I think one of the things I'll just mention is that we need to continue to remember and understand that, infants, toddlers, children, adolescents, they're in a period of growth. So their nutrition needs are going to be way different than ours. So a lot of the different nutrients are going to be needed at a higher rate for them. So just kind of understanding that their nutrition might look a little bit different is the first thing that I would just educate people on to help them to understand what that may look like in the home. I think, the next thing I want to talk a little bit about too are just some variable pointers that I have when I work with parents, because that's one of the biggest things that I see. I've had a lot of clients that come to me and are just kind of like, I'm ready to address my eating disorder. I don't want this to impact my kiddos the way it's impacted me, whether that's through an eating disorder, whether it's through, parents putting them on diets, whether it's through, just a negative food culture in the house. So a few different pointers that I always kind of talk through with each individual is being mindful of your language around food. So your kiddos, I always like to say your kiddos are always listening. So they're going to pick up on the way in which you talk about food. Even if you're not using like negative language around food, they may pick up on that. So really avoiding any language such as like, this is unhealthy or this is junk food can be helpful for them. I think if we want to shift it, I always encourage like just being descriptive of the food, of like, oh, this is salty, or, this is crunchy, or this is pretty spicy, or this is sweet, can be a way to kind of make it more neutral. We don't have to necessarily jump all the way to positive, but I think it can help just to make it feel a little bit more neutral. And then modeling healthy eating behaviors. So I know it can be challenging to tell your child to eat what's on their plate when maybe you're having something different on your plate. So I may be using the phrase like healthy eating in a way in which general society may not. But I think like if you're having a family pizza night at home, but instead you're choosing maybe a salad with grilled chicken or what have you, your kiddo's going to see that. And I think that sends a subtle message to them, just that maybe what's on their plate isn't what they should be eating, or there might just be questions that start to come up for those kiddos of like, why am I eating this if they're eating something different? I know you had already kind of mentioned this in the question, but avoid using food as a reward. So I think it's important to understand that food is food, food is fuel, food is nourishing. So trying to put all of the food on a level playing field helps avoid putting food on a pedestal, because a lot of times I'll hear people say, you can have dessert after you finish your dinner, and if you don't finish your dinner you can't have dessert. So that's kind of putting that dessert at a higher level or something that feels more important. So if we put a cookie with our kiddos lunch, that can help to like level those foods out for them. And then the other thing you had mentioned is like bringing those different types of foods in the house, and then the kiddos eating those pretty quickly. I think it can be really valuable to keep a wide variety of foods in the house. I would avoid eliminating those foods, because that can also send a message to the kiddos that like we shouldn't be eating these foods. These foods are quote unquote bad. But instead of having the mindset of like removing or pulling out, really trying to shift the mindset of like adding to. So adding to the variety of snacks that are available can help them just naturally diversify their intake. And that can help them to see that all foods can really fit. And we can work on that with balance and moderation.
That was so incredibly helpful. I cannot tell you how often I have people asking this exact question. And to me, it just illustrates maybe how we were raised around food, or like you were saying, I mean, we know so much more. And
Mm-hmm.
to be fair, so much better about
Mm-hmm.
how to handle and discuss food, to create better relationships with food. And a lot of us, we didn't know, our parents didn't know that, right?
Right.
They weren't intentionally trying to harm us. But
Right.
I just,
Absolutely.
probably 50% of the people I work with have some sort of ingrained insecurity around nutrition because of how they were taught, because of what they witnessed, exactly like you were saying. So,
Yeah.
it's wonderful, for you to put that into words so eloquently as you did. And I just cannot, echo it enough. I get questions all the time. You let your kids eat that? I'm like, yes. Like, to your point, everything is in the house. I was actually
Mhm.
cutting up cookies for a dinner I'm having at the house this morning, as they were eating breakfast. And they were each like, can we have one? I was like, yeah, put it right on their breakfast tray with them, right? Like, it's a cookie. We don't need to make it more than it is. It's a delicious homemade cookie that we're going to eat with breakfast.
Absolutely. And I think like talk through it with my clients sometimes and break it down to the fundamental level of like, most of the time desserts are a carb and a fat. And like, do you need carbs? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, do you need fats? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, so remind yourself of that when you want a dessert. Like, this is fuel for your body. So I think it can be really helpful to break it down at that level. And I think there is a lot of morality associated with specific foods, and we need to pull that away of like, this isn't bad. You aren't bad for consuming this. It is nourishing. So I think it's important to like reframe the way we're looking at food. Not only that, I think, what you had mentioned is just I do see, regardless of an eating disorder, I do find that one of the things that I talk through with caregivers is just sometimes there's like that guilt in caregivers who may have an individual with an eating disorder. And so I just think one of the things I want to say to all caregivers out there is echoing what you said, Megan, of like, I think individuals act off of what they believe to be true, and there's just a lot of mixed messaging out there. So I think it's always helpful to touch base with a reliable resource at like working through that and what that looks like. And it's not about blame. And I feel like a lot of times people feel some shame or guilt around it, and the most important thing is to kind of learn and move forward with what we've learned.
Absolutely. Okay. Next question is from Joe Morse. I want to thank you all for the great nutrition hydration tips. As someone who has struggled with body image for my whole life, it has been exceedingly difficult to drill into my head that I need to eat more carbs, especially before a big race if I want to perform well. I've lost 80 pounds and I am no longer overweight. For my third marathon, I decided to commit to a full 3-day carb load, finally. Most importantly, I stayed off the scale all week long. The day before my race, I had 5 giant bagels and a few graham crackers and water and Element, and that was it. I took 6 gels during the race and drank 3 or 4 cups of water and Gatorade every fluid station, and I crushed my goal. Honestly, I thought it would be at least another year or two before I broke 4 hours in the marathon, and I somehow managed to pull off 3:57. Go carbs. Which was a full 26 minutes faster than my previous PR. I'm sure there are a few things contributing, but I am confident that my nutrition played a huge part in my success. My question is, do you have any tips for how to sensibly incorporate carbs into your diet, not just during marathon training, but all the time? I want to have a healthier relationship with food, but despite this amazing race result, I am worried that I will end up listening to the negative voices in my head and revert to my old eating habits in between training blocks, which generally means avoiding carbs at all costs. I know that balance is the answer, but would really like to hear any practical tips that you could share to make this dream a reality.
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying to Joe, like, I think that's amazing to see those results come to fruition after, incorporating the carbs. I think it can be really important for individuals to stay off the scale. And sometimes I'm like, just throw it in the trash. I don't think you need a scale at home. It's all about behaviors and the way in which we nourish our body. But it can just be something that can be unhelpful for individuals to look at that number because we know it's going to fluctuate just naturally. I think one of the things that really came to mind as you were talking through that, Megan, for me is something I do a lot of times with my clients to help make carbs feel less scary is developing a list of foods that are very challenging for us, and then kind of denoting on that list on a scale from 1 to 10 how difficult are these for us to eat. So 1 being the least challenging, 10 being the most challenging, and then also identifying like rationale around why you feel like it is so challenging for you. So what we can do with that list is we can take it and we can be intentional about implementing those carbs, because we know that exposure to those foods is going to help your brain like rewire and reframe that mindset around carbs. I will just preface this that this can be something that takes a little bit of time because oftentimes those negative thoughts we associate with a food aren't developed overnight. So we have to work on rewiring our brain to understand that carbs are not the enemy, carbs are our friend, and the way in which they're helping and being supportive of our body. So usually I take that list and I talk through it with my clients and provide psychoeducation as needed. I think sometimes people are like, there's a misconception that carbs are going to cause somebody to gain weight and weight gain is unhealthy, which isn't always true. Sometimes it is extremely appropriate for individuals, but just like whatever that association is with the food, I want to make sure I'm providing sound education to that person just so that it can help them when they are exposing themselves to the food to what we do. We talk about like checking the facts. So reminding yourself like, this is fuel for my body. Carbs aren't bad. And then the more and more we expose ourselves to that food, it helps to desensitize us. Just kind of like any fear that an individual might have, it's going to help to rewire our brain and understand like nothing bad is happening. And it takes time. And then usually what I have clients do is like months later after being consistent at practicing that, I want to have them reevaluate where they put those numbers on the scale of 1 to 10, and then that can help guide us like what direction do we need to keep going. And so it's just like a tangible way that we can evaluate how those foods are showing up for us, and then making sure we're intentional about the intervention. Because one of the things I'll say is sometimes people are like, I think it'll just get better for me. And that unfortunately is not the case. It is about being very intentional. And that's a practice I do with a lot of my clients. And I've seen such progress and such success with it that I think this could be a really helpful tool for Joe to utilize.
Yeah, that's a great tool and one that I wasn't even aware of. So I'm learning new things today too. And I think I'm curious your thought on this. Joe seems like he's a very like numbers driven person. So I'm wondering if, back to your point about facts and facts being very helpful,
Mm-hmm.
if, him understanding these are my carb needs for how I'm training, this is how much you need, like have those tangible facts to help
Mm-hmm.
build confidence, to build that in, if somebody isn't triggered by numbers.
Yeah. I've honestly seen it go both ways. I
Okay.
think sometimes I think it can add fuel to the fire of like, um, that is an absurd number. That's sometimes what I've heard of. I usually talk to them about like servings, like let's shoot for this many servings in a day instead of grams, just because it makes it a little less number focused.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can be, triggering for a client, and clients are continuously, coming up a little bit short. And then like you were saying, like I have seen some people grasp it and be like, my dietitian said this is okay, I'm going to do it, So I do think
Mhm.
it can go either way. I think if there is an eating disorder present, I think I talk a lot about how the brain changes. So sometimes we see like brain shrinkage happen for individuals with eating disorders, as well as some changes in our neuroplasticity. So I think some of those, the prefrontal cortex, where we have like the logical thinking, can kind of be compromised sometimes if we're not adequately nourished, and our brain is still working on recovery. So sometimes those numbers, even though we're like, we gave them the education and this is how much they need, can just be really hard to conceptualize if that part of the brain is misfiring or just not working the way in which it needs to.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And again, kind of separating the eating disorder from the person, right? Like our brain
Mhm,
is
absolutely.
literally not in a place to absorb this
Mhm,
information right now. So we need to address that first before we, even start to address what does adequate nutrition look like for
yeah,
this particular individual. Yeah, that's a really good point.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to bring up, because you mentioned it and Joe had also mentioned it, was the scale.
Hmm.
So I see this relationship with some of my clients and a lot of runners around the scale. And I'm very, very, very in the boat of just get rid of it, right? Like if it is not helping, which it rarely is, what
Hmm.
is that doing for us, right? So like I often am trying to help break that association of needing to know what our weight
Hmm.
is for clients. And I'm just curious, since this is your daily in and out,
Yeah.
what advice would you have for someone that is really having trouble not stepping on that scale every morning, and then taking it a step further, not they're unable to disassociate that number from their self-worth.
Hmm. Hmm. It's a heavy hitting question. I think so. I'd start out with, yeah, the scale piece. So a lot of times that's one of my first recommendations in sessions. One of the questions I ask clients that I find resonates with them is like, how does that number serve you? What impact does that number have to you in that moment, to you throughout your day? Like, is it something you're continuously thinking about or worrying about that doesn't allow you to fully engage with your kiddo, like on a trip or vacation? Like, how does that number serve you? And if like, sometimes people are quick to say, like, screw that, I'm getting rid of it. Oftentimes too, it's like, let's navigate that and talk through that a little bit more. And I might like have them do like a pros and cons list, and just remind them, like, let's connect with your own personal values and how that number shows up for you, and make a pros and cons list, and let's talk through it next time. So I think that, again, it's a habit that people develop, and they oftentimes feel very tied to stepping on the scale, whether that be, like you were mentioning, how they feel about themselves, or, also just how maybe performance, like you said earlier, of just like, if they feel like their nutrition changed, and they saw improvements in their performance, they might be like, it's because I weighed less. So it's really just about like pulling the two apart and kind of talking through that. I think, what was the other question you asked, Megan, around?
um, it allowing the scale to define self-worth or set the tone for the day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that can very much so be very challenging for clients. Kind of as I was, yeah, mentioning, I think it can really impact them, their quality of life. how they feel about themselves. And those numbers just hold so much power. We want to give the power back to the individual and know that there's so much more to them than the number on the scale, and really kind of doing some ACT work with like a therapist of like acceptance commitment therapy is just a lot about honing in on your values and your value system. And I think sometimes that can be really powerful work. And just like acknowledging you're so much more than a number on a scale.
Yeah, I think that's great. Definitely. Because we hear it a lot and it's a little heartbreaking. I want people to not allow that silly scale to dictate how they're feeling and their food
No,
choices. And so, yeah,
absolutely.
challenge anybody out there who's feeling that way to take your advice and, maybe find some sort of therapy that might help them in order to kind of work through it, because if we've been stuck in this repetitive behavior and thought process for a long time, we really need help breaking it.
Absolutely.
All right, our next question is from Rachel. She said, my question is about some new ads I've been getting from UCAN comparing their products to GLP-1s and touting it as an alternative. These ads just feel off to me. I can't stand the culture around Ozempic, especially the part where it's a medication that's meant for people with a specific condition, yet being used for vanity. It seems strange that UCAN would suddenly start promoting itself as a weight loss supplement. As someone who struggled with body image and nutrition in the past, it makes me not want to try any other products from them. I might be overreacting, but I know that Feathers has the science and the knowledge to explain what might be going on. And that's my question, I guess, is what is this product and why is it being promoted in this way?
So I'll take this first and then punt over my questions to Lindsay for her expertise as well. So it's not just, UCAN who might be putting some diety message around their sports nutrition product. So if you've listened to episode 1 and you are now nearing the end of episode 2, you know how prevalent disordered eating and eating disorders can be in the community of running. And I'm very, 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 very sensitive to anyone marketing to that population that is perhaps using language that can further support or fuel the fire of some of these disordered thoughts. So I'm totally with Rachel on this. And like I said, I don't mean to directly call out UCAN because there's other brands doing similar things, such as some of the ketone companies, some of the CGM companies for continuous blood sugar monitoring, some of the electrolyte drinks marketing no sugar, that kind of stuff. So it's everywhere. It's not just one specific product. It just happens to be Rachel's question. And I think I spend so much time helping you guys, educate you guys on how much nutrition we need and fueling adequately to allow our bodies to do what we are expecting them to do. So some of these messages are very counterintuitive to that, as you don't need to fuel as much when you use this type of fuel, or this is going to curb your appetite if you eat this type of fuel after a run. Those things are very big red flags to me, because we need to be fueling our body to recover from what we just did, or we're not going to be able to continue to run the way that we want to. So, more than anything, just bringing light to the fact that if you are seeing a brand that is saying things that are a little bit counterintuitive to fueling your body well for performance, that I think you're right, Rachel, and others, to be skeptical of this, because adequate fueling is key to continuing to do what we love with our body as we move forward. So anything that's telling us we need less of that is definitely a red flag. So good question on why this is being promoted this way. But I am just curious, any insight you might have, Lindsay, on the marketing of products, whether it is in the sports nutrition realm or just any type of product, and how those types of messages could be triggering certain thoughts in anyone, including runners, and kind of your just advice on all that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different directions I could go with this question. I do think it's a really good question, and I think it sheds light on a lot of the questions I do get from clients. I think I'll start with just kind of speaking specifically to kind of the GLP-1 claims, what have you. I think there's just been a dramatic rise in use of those weight loss medications. I think I have talked to a lot of my clients, some of my clients have been on them and then went off of them. And so they're really just kind of seeking that baseline psychological help. I think I've heard them be marketed to a lot of my clients of like, it'll quiet the eating disorder noise for you. And I think that for me is kind of heartbreaking that the providers don't have the knowledge they need to understand like it's a temporary fix. And it's not a true fix. It's not a long-term sustainable fix for this individual. And giving them this medication is actually going to probably do more harm than good from the psychological aspect, because we're truly not fixing kind of what's going on for them at that psychological level. So I've worked with a lot of individuals, and sometimes I've had clients who went on the weight loss medication and it triggered an eating disorder, because we know weight loss can be something that triggers an eating disorder. Um, so ultimately kind of taking a step back and just understanding kind of the impact it can have on individuals with eating disorders or disordered eating. In terms of supplementation, I do think a lot of times I have questions from my clients. I'll have clients that come in on like, honestly, like 20 plus supplements sometimes, just kind of always seeking the promise that the supplements may provide. As you were saying, like basing it off the science, Megan, I think it's really important. I encourage my clients to be educated consumers, and I'll have them like bring them to our sessions and we'll just kind of talk through them. I'll do research in the moment, because transparently, I can't keep up with all the different supplements that are out there. And so like, I'll just be real with them and I'll like walk through it and I'll tell them how I'm thinking about it. And it's helpful for them to kind of connect the dots, and kind of at the end of the day, really going back to like food is your fuel and this is what you need for your body to run efficiently. It's kind of like sometimes it's, like trying to put water in a car instead of gasoline. Like, yes, you're putting something in there, but is it what the car needs? No. And so it's trying to reevaluate that and just make sure, like you're saying, you're fueling your body sufficiently.
Yeah, and that's a very impactful point too about the GLP-1s. We get a lot of questions about them. We've covered them a few times. It sounds like we kind of have similar thoughts on them not being a long-term fix for anything, but I do hear a lot that those medications quiet that food noise, and it's very interesting to hear your take on how that is also not great if there is some underlying disordered thinking around eating. That quieting that is temporary, right? It's a band-aid. It's not going to actually fix the problem. So yeah, just if anybody's having these feelings, I think it's great to just hear some expert, thoughts and where your mind's at with it all.
Megan, have you seen these ads from UCAN in your feed?
Yeah.
Oh,
You
I
haven't?
haven't. No.
Yeah.
So what are they suggesting the use case here? Because I've seen it as fueling for running, obviously, but these look very different.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. The ad actually does look significantly different. And because of the type of starch that's in UCAN that's not spiking blood sugar, right? This long, steady, slow, they have some claims that it also decreases appetite by not having some of these spikes. And they're saying that that long-lasting energy will curb appetite longer. And we know that GLP-1s, the big draw to them is it curbs appetite. So I think that's where they're going with this comparison. But yeah, I agree with you. It looks like an ad that's less sports focused, maybe trying to reach a different market, but clearly it's reaching the runners.
Okay, I think this wraps up our second episode in the series. Thank you again, Lindsay, for joining us. This was very insightful, and I think this will be super helpful for a lot of our audience.
And Lindsay, if people want more information on you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can check out my website. My business is Fulfilled Nutrition Counseling. So fulfillednutritioncounseling.com. And there's a lot of different information of like how to contact me, how to reach out. I'm always happy to if you're not in the state of Ohio. So I practice within the state of Ohio. If you want to reach out to me, I am working on and getting licensed in other states, but I also have networked in the eating disorder community and can know some different dietitians or therapists in different states as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.